silence, and listen. There was a time when heaven was not at war with itself. A time before defiance, before fracture, before betrayal. A time when the order of the unseen world remained unbroken. And then something happened. Something so severe that it altered the balance between earth and sky forever. Something the ancient texts would later describe as a rebellion. This is not the story of a human uprising. This is not the story of empires clashing or thrones collapsing. This is the story of a revolt that began in heaven itself. And at the center of everything stands the name of Enoch. Enoch is remembered as the man who walked with God. The man who did not die. The man who vanished from the earth without a grave. But behind that quiet, mysterious disappearance lies a truth far darker than most people realize. A truth bound to watchers, forbidden unions, and a defiance that shook the heavens. If you feel that ancient conflicts still echo through the present, if you sense that some truths were buried long ago for a reason, you can subscribe and continue this journey into the rebellion with me. Long before the flood erased the first world, humanity lived closer to the origin of all things. The memory of creation had not yet faded into legend. The distance between the divine and the mortal was narrower than it would ever be again. In those early generations, the earth was watched. Not only by human eyes, but by beings assigned to observe the unfolding of creation from above. They were called the Watchers. Guardians of the boundary between heaven and earth. Observers of the children of men. They were not created to rule. They were not created to interfere. They were created to watch. And for a time, they obeyed. But watching turned into longing. Longing turned into desire. And desire turned into rebellion. The ancient records say that some of the Watchers looked upon human women, and what they saw awakened something forbidden within them. They were not meant to cross that boundary. They were not meant to mix the realms. But they did. And that single act of defiance changed everything. From that union came beings that were neither fully divine nor fully human. Creatures of immense strength, unrestrained hunger, and uncontrollable violence. The ancient world called them the giants. The Nephilim. They devoured the resources of humanity. They turned against the people who had given them life. And when food ran out, they turned on all living things. The earth filled with violence. Not only the violence of men, but the violence of something that should never have walked the soil. And above it all, the Watchers who had rebelled saw what they had unleashed. But it was already too late. Heaven had been violated. Earth had been corrupted. The order between realms had collapsed. This was not just sin. This was treason against the structure of creation itself. And it was into this broken world that Enoch continued to walk. While giants ruled by force and Watchers hid their shame in the heavens, Enoch walked a different path. He did not join the corruption. He did not bow to the violence. He walked with God. And that is why he was chosen. The Watchers had crossed a line that could never be redrawn. What began as desire had become corruption. And what became corruption soon turned into devastation. According to the ancient records, the Watchers did not fall alone. They brought with them knowledge that was never meant to touch the human world. They taught men how to shape weapons from metal. They taught them how to wage war with unnatural efficiency. They taught women the hidden arts of enchantment. The crafting of veils, powders, mirrors, and illusions. They reshaped desire, identity, and power. They revealed the paths of the stars, the cycles of the moon, the movements that govern the heavens. Humanity advanced at a terrifying speed. But wisdom did not grow with it. Power multiplied faster than restraint. The world became brilliant, and the world became dangerous. Meanwhile, the giants continued to expand their dominion. They consumed harvests meant for thousands. They crushed cities with their presence. They reshaped the surface of the earth through violence. And when the earth could no longer sustain them, they turned against every living thing. The beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and finally, against mankind itself. The blood of the innocent soaked into the soil. The cries of the dying rose without rest. The ancient texts say that the earth itself began to accuse. That creation cried out against those who had broken its order. And in the highest realms of heaven, the rebellion could no longer be ignored. The loyal watchers looked upon the devastation with horror. They saw what their fallen brethren had unleashed. And they feared that the corruption would swallow both heaven and earth. So they cried out to the throne of judgment, not for vengeance, but for intervention. The ancient names echo through the fragments: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel. Archangels called to respond to a crime that had no equal in the history of creation. The verdict was not delayed. The watchers who had fallen would be bound. The giants would be destroyed. The world would be cleansed. But before judgment could fall, one thing still had to be done. The condemned watchers demanded something unthinkable. They demanded a mediator. They demanded a voice to speak on their behalf. They knew they could not approach heaven. They knew their rebellion had sealed their fate. And yet, in fear and desperation, they turned to the one human who still walked with God. They turned to Enoch. And it was at this exact moment that Enoch's destiny changed forever. The watchers came to him in secret. Not in glory. Not in authority. But in fear. They were no longer the guardians of heaven. They were fugitives of the cosmic order, condemned by their own choices. And yet, they did something almost impossible to imagine. They asked a man for help. They begged Enoch to write a petition on their behalf, to carry their desperate plea into the presence of the Most High, to ask for forgiveness where none was promised. It was a dangerous request, not only for them, but for him. Because to stand between heaven and rebels is to stand in the place where judgment strikes. No human had ever done such a thing. Enoch listened to them, not in agreement, not in defiance, but in silence. And then he did something that still divides those who read these texts. He agreed to carry their words. This decision is one of the most controversial moments in the entire saga, because it forces a question that has no easy answer. Was Enoch showing mercy to the unforgivable, or was he obeying a destiny that had already been written? After hearing this, it is impossible to remain neutral. Do you believe Enoch was right to carry the plea of the fallen watchers? Or do you believe some rebellions deserve no intercession? Leave your answer in the comments. When the plea was written, the watchers waited in trembling anticipation. They did not know if forgiveness was even conceptually possible for what they had done. Then the impossible happened. Enoch fell into a vision. But this vision was not a dream. It was an ascent. A violent crossing out of the human world. The heavens opened before him. Not gently, but like a gate torn open by force. Clouds became corridors. Light became architecture. The sky unfolded into chambers of terrifying brilliance. And Enoch was carried upward. He rose beyond the clouds of the lower sky, beyond the paths of the winds, beyond the realm where even storms are born. The air around him changed. Not colder, not warmer, but heavier with meaning. The ancient texts describe layers of heaven, not as empty space, but as living regions, each with its own purpose. In one chamber, he saw the movements of the stars, not as distant lights, but as servants bound to fixed laws. In another, he saw storehouses of thunder, vessels where lightning waits before it is released upon the world. In another, he saw the pathways of the sun and moon laid out like ancient tracks, routes no human hand could ever alter. Every level revealed that the universe was not chaos. It was structure. It was law. It was order enforced with absolute precision. And this made the rebellion even more terrifying, because the Watchers had not rebelled against confusion. They had rebelled against perfect order. Enoch was then carried into a region the texts describe only with trembling language, a place where the walls themselves were made of fire that did not consume. There he saw beings whose form had no fixed shape, beings who were flame, beings who were voice, beings who were command. These were not watchers. These were not messengers. These were powers that stood closer to the throne than any other order. Their presence pressed against Enoch's soul like weight upon breath. And yet, he was not destroyed. He was being prepared. Then he was brought before the place where judgment proceeds. Not a chair. Not a throne as men imagine it, but a convergence of authority so intense it bends reality around it. And there, the words of the Watchers were read aloud. Their plea, their confession, their fear. They did not deny what they had done. They did not deny the corruption. They did not deny the blood. They asked only one thing: that their sentence not be eternal. For a moment that stretched beyond time, nothing answered. And then the judgment was spoken. Their plea was denied. Their fate was sealed. There would be no forgiveness. They would be bound beneath the earth, in darkness, until the final reckoning of all things. And the giants, their offspring, would be wiped from the surface of the world. When the judgment ended, Enoch was no longer the same. He had seen what no living man was meant to see. He had stood where rebellion meets consequence. When Enoch was carried back from the place of judgment, the weight of what he had witnessed followed him, not as memory alone, but as a burden carved into his being. He had seen the architecture of justice, not shaped by mercy, not tempered by negotiation, but defined by eternal law. The Watchers had believed that their power might shield them, that their ancient status might grant them exception. But the judgment proved that even the highest can fall beyond recovery. Enoch returned with that knowledge sealed inside him, knowledge that would forever separate him from ordinary men. The texts suggest that his eyes no longer looked at the world in the same way. The sky above him was no longer empty. The earth beneath him was no longer simple dust. Every movement of creation now carried a shadow of consequence. Every breath echoed with the memory of judgment. And yet, the most dangerous thing Enoch carried back with him was not fear. It was understanding. He now knew how easily order could fracture, how quickly guardians could become rebels, How thin the boundary truly was between obedience and destruction. This knowledge was forbidden not because it was false, but because it was too true. No human civilization before or after the flood was meant to fully comprehend how close the universe had come to collapse. The rebellion of the Watchers was not a local disaster. It was a wound in the fabric of existence itself. And Enoch had seen the wound from the inside. The visions did not end with judgment. From the heights, he was shown what the rebellion would ultimately unleash upon the earth. He saw waters rising beyond their appointed boundaries. He saw the cleansing that would one day swallow the corrupted world. The flood was not only a punishment for human wickedness. It was a consequence of celestial rebellion, a resetting of a system that had nearly shattered. Enoch was shown all of this while the world below still carried on in ignorance. The giants still ruled with violence. The Watchers still awaited their binding. Humanity still moved forward without knowing how close the end truly was. And Enoch walked among them, carrying the future like a hidden fire. From this point on, Enoch was no longer merely a righteous man. He had become a witness of the final consequences of rebellion. And the heavens were not finished with him yet. The rebellion had been judged. The sentence had been decreed. But the consequences were still unfolding through time. The Watchers would be bound in the depths of the earth. The giants would be erased. And the world itself would be washed clean. But Enoch remained the living thread between what had happened in heaven and what was about to happen on earth. He had seen the end of the rebellion before the world had even begun to collapse. He had seen the punishment before the crime had fully finished unfolding. This is the burden of forbidden knowledge. To understand the ending while others still walk toward it in ignorance. The ancient texts say that after these visions, Enoch did not boast. He did not rule. He did not seek power. He walked. He continued to walk among men while carrying the knowledge of what was coming. And then, one day, he walked farther than any man before him. The ancient record says it without ornament, without explanation, without description. Enoch walked with God. And he was not. For God took him. He did not die. He was removed from the path of the coming destruction. Withdrawn from the world before the flood erased the corrupted age. Some say this was mercy. Some say it was reward. Others say it was necessity. Because a man who has seen the judgment of heaven cannot remain long in a world that is about to be judged. The rebellion that began with forbidden desire had reshaped everything. It reshaped the heavens. It reshaped the earth. And it reshaped the destiny of mankind itself. The flood would come. The giants would fall. The Watchers would be chained. And the world would begin again. But the scar left by the rebellion would never fully fade. Its memory would survive in fragments, in whispers, in forbidden texts. And at the center of all those fragments stands one name: Enoch. The man who walked with God. The man who entered the war of heaven. The man who witnessed the judgment of the rebels. The man who carried forbidden knowledge and did not remain on the earth. What you have heard here is only one layer of that story. The rebellion is only the beginning. The full journey of Enoch through the heavens, the realms he crossed, the laws he witnessed, and the knowledge he carried beyond what any man should know, continues beyond this moment. If you want to follow that entire journey without interruption, if you want to step beyond the rebellion and into the deeper mysteries of the heavens, you will find that path open in the longer work prepared on the channel. This was only the threshold. The rest of the descent and ascent awaits you there.